Hello friends! This week my video is titled The Church in China, and it's the title of a book, a significant book of the same name, The Church in China, subtitled How It Survives and Prospers Under Communism, written by Carl Lawrence. This book was published in 1985, and after the first year of its publication, it won a Gold Medallion award for its excellence. Carl Lawrence, who wrote this book, was my first boss at FEBC Radio. In the late 1960s, when Diane and I were candidating to go with the Far East Broadcasting Company, it was Carl Lawrence who would write to us and encourage us and tell us what we needed to do to prepare for working on the field. At that time, he lived in Hong Kong, and he was heading up what was called the Research Center for FEBC International. Carl and Terry Madison were the first two staffers, and they moved to the Philippines during the time we were raising our support. So Diane and I never did live in Hong Kong. We ended up going straight to the Philippines to join them. This picture is from an old magazine of FEBC showing Carl Lawrence on the left, Terry Madison on the right, and their first secretary in the Philippines, Gloria Aquino, who later became my secretary over the years of overseas broadcasts. And if you could see the bottom of the picture, it has a cut line and it says, "This is the team so far at the Research Center, and they're waiting for Paul Estabrooks to come and join them." Well, I did, and that's where I started my missionary work in the Philippines, was at the Communications Research Center of FEBC Radio, and Carl Lawrence was the boss for Terry Madison and myself. Terry was a fellow Canadian who I've talked to you about several times, especially in Project Pearl and in other videos. Carl was an amazing man. He had worked for CBS television in the United States. He did not have a university degree, and that always seemed to psychologically bother him. He was brilliant, incredible writer, and yet he still felt the lack of formal education degree. We always told him he didn't need to feel that way, but perhaps that's the way life goes in Western world. Carl would often have dinner with the Madisons and us on special events like birthdays and anniversaries, etc. And this is a picture of the three couples, the Lawrences on the right, the Madisons back in the center, and Diane and I on the left. We became very close friends and worked together throughout the year of 1971 and into the beginning of 1972. Carl was the program director for FEBC Radio. He went home on furlough in 1972 and became a pastor, excellent preacher, and then later rejoined FEBC as program director. And after FEBC Radio, he went to Haven of Rest, which is a radio program now called Haven Today. But in the 1980s, he was a regular speaker on the radio program Haven of Rest. And he wrote the scripts. He did a lot of traveling. He did a lot of writing. He wrote a number of books, often about the persecuted church, which is what kept us together even years after he had left FEBC. I left FEBC in 1979 to join Open Doors working into China. In 1984, Carl Lawrence contacted me and he said, "I've written a book on Chiapas, on different situations around the world, and he was always a China watcher. And he said, I've always wanted to write a book on the church in China. Can you help me do the research for that book? One of the things of which would require us to spend some time inside China talking to people of the Chinese church." Well, by this time, I was living in Singapore. heading up the Southeast Asia ministry. China was still a very big part of that because the greatest majority of ethnic group identity in Singapore is Chinese. And we had many people there who would be going to China and coming back and giving us reports on what they found and the believers that they met as they did that. Carl said, I want to go to China and talk to these people that you know because I'm writing this book called The Church in China. I agreed, and we met in Hong Kong. When we met in Hong Kong, I said to Carl, now we're going to fly into Hangzhou. This is a city not far from Shanghai on the central coast, and they still do not have X-ray machines there. There, you just talk to a customs agent as you go into the country. And I said, we're going to take Bibles with us. And he went, oh, no, Paul. You don't want me to take Bibles. He says, I have a face that gives away whatever it is I'm doing somehow. He said, I can't bring anything through customs or they'll discover me. I just give it away. And I said, well, Carl, we're going to pray about this. But here's the thing. If you don't take Bibles, there are going to be a number of people who would have received those Bibles who desperately need them. And if you take those Bibles and they don't get through, well, that's the Lord's doing. But if you do take the Bibles and they get through, there are going to be a number of very happy believers in China who are going to receive these Bibles, many of them for the first time, to have one of their own. Carl said, oh boy, I don't like this idea, but let me pray about it. So the next morning, before we headed to the airport, Carl said to me, okay, I didn't sleep all night. I was wrestling with this whole thing about taking Bibles in my suitcase. But I've decided that your argument is right, that if we get anything through, there'll be that many more Bibles in the hands of believers in China. And so I'm willing to do it. We went to the office there, and we picked up packages to put in our suitcase and in our shoulder bags, the hand carries that we took, which they usually check first when you got to the customs point. So we flew into Hangzhou. I might mention that they had given us packages of Bibles, 6 full Bibles, but smaller size, 6 of them wrapped together in white paper and taped so that they were wrapped in packages. You couldn't see what it was. It was just a package. So we had a number of them spread throughout our suitcases and our shoulder bags. When we arrived in Hangzhou, there was a long lineup waiting for customs. We were standing there, and Carl was just sweating. You could just almost feel the sweat running down his back of his neck as he waited and waited. We went in 2 different lines, just, the whole thing was always not identifying one another, should one of us be discovered with these Bibles. And we went different lines. Well, we went, and I had a guy who really worked me over good. He was really checking me out, but praise the Lord, he didn't find the Bibles. And as I made my way out of the things, there's Carl already out there standing there, and he had this big smile on his face. And he says, wow, prayer works, he says. He said, what happened was, as we were more in a private situation, he told me his story. He said, what happened was I got to the customs man. He said, put your shoulder bag here on the counter. I put it down. He unzipped it, put his hand in, and the very first thing he brought out was a white package, the package of the Bibles. And he said to me, what is this? And I said to myself, see, I told these guys I cannot do this kind of thing. I just give it away. And Carl said to him, it's literature. And the Chinese man looked at him and paused and said, oh, literature. Okay, fine. He put it back in the bag and waved Carl through. It was quite obvious to us that this Cuss's-man, who knew some English, did not know the word literature. And he wasn't about to reveal the fact he didn't know it. And so Carl got through with all of his Bibles, which we dropped off with believers as we traveled through the country. It was an amazing time. We got to Beijing at the end of our journey, and they were repairing the Tiananmen Square and the entrance that has the big picture of Mao. So we took pictures of each other there, and this is Carl's picture that I took, standing on Tiananmen Square at the entrance to the Forbidden City. You can see the bamboo rigging there that they're using as scaffolding to do the repairs and touch-ups on the entrance to the Forbidden City. Well, we went to many, many homes, quietly, secretly, visiting with believers and with a Chinese colleague who would interpret for us, because very few of these people spoke English. Interpret for us, and Carl took down his notes of all of these interviews of wonderful people who had had all kinds of incredible experiences of persecution over the years under the Red Guard of the Cultural Revolution and Mao Zedong, who Carl likened in his book to the Nero. He said Mao Zedong was like the Nero of the Roman Empire, who, virtually crucified believers and created a fire and accused them of starting it. A terrible, terrible tyrant who caused the deaths of many, many believers. And that was the basis for the book, The Church in China. We left each other to meet up again 4 years later on a trip to the Soviet Union, doing a similar kind of visit, only that's a story for another day. But Carl put together his book, The Church in China, which was a winner. It was a bestseller, and it was the Gold Medallion book of 1985. I want to just read you his conclusion. He wrote some thank yous to those people that we visited. The stories in here are just amazing stories of how people endured and survived, and the church grew significantly even under communist pressure. Of course, the same thing happened in the Soviet Union. But here he's writing his thank yous at the end of his book to those people we visited. And he said, "Thank you for assuaging my frustrations with your tears of understanding, for mollifying my anger with your living testimonies, for massaging my aching heart with your broken fingers. Thank you for sharing your secrets of survival. Thank you for being real people who shed real tears so that I may taste one precious drop of the real salt of this earth." Beautiful, beautiful conclusion to his book, The Church in China. And so watch for a future video where I'll tell you the story of Carl's and my visit to the Soviet Union, and the title of that one will be Chased by the KGB. Carl sent me a copy of the book, and on the inside cover he wrote, "Dear Paul, you did everything but write it. Thankfully, Carl."